The two strongest human factions in Warhammer. Cathay controlling the east, keeping the forces of chaos away with the Great Bastion. The Empire, Lord of the West, holding back the Great Enemy by having their hardier, colder neighbour, Kislev, do most of the heavy lifting. Outside of the chaos-worshipping Norscans, these are the two strongest human factions in the game. Bretonnia, the Border Princes, Kislev, they're all decently powerful in their own right, and Bretonnia and the Empire have had their differences in the past, but here we're talking real heavyweight stuff. What would happen if the two leading human factions in the old world of Warhammer Fantasy decided that they'd had enough of fighting Chaos, fighting Orcs, fighting Skaven, and every other species that gave them grief, and decided to go after each other? Today, we're answering who would win between the Empire and Cathay. To get these two to fight is going to be quite the task. Despite them being a short journey away from one another in total war, there is a great deal of separation between Cathay and the Empire in the Warhammer world. The men of the old world have largely just heard of Cathay, if that. There's a sense of awe and mystery around the land of the East, which is only visited by the most adventurous merchants. Those that aren't eaten by the ogres roaming the Silk Road and the Mountains of Morn. It is also known that Cathay is the leading power in the East, so it's not like the Empire would look at the land and see it as one ripe for the taking. The same is true on Cathay's side of things. Usually the people of Cathay are so busy dealing with hobgoblins, Skaven and potential chaos invasions, they can't really go and expand. However, I've written the title of this video, and so we're going to get them to fight in our very own Warhammer version of Godzilla vs Kong. We could leech off my previous video, which showed Karl Franz falling to chaos, saying maybe Cathay decides to come and purge the Empire of its corrupted Emperor, but that feels weird and lame. Surely another old world power would deal with that, and Cathay is unlikely to even know about it. So let's wipe the slate clean and come up with something new, something political, some misjustice so bad that both sides have no choice but to drop their usual conflicts and focus everything they've got on trying to wipe each other out. How do we do this? A simple assassination, of course. Not by either Cathay or the Empire's doing, but instead by the Hobgoblin Khanate, the old enemy of the Cathayans. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that to try and find an ally in another nation fighting chaos, Karl Franz sends a diplomat over to Cathay in the hopes of establishing relations and a better trade deal. However, along the way, an ambush takes place, set up so it looks like the Cathayans killed the diplomat and their retinue, something which the Empire does not take kindly to. As each messenger demanding recompense meets the same fate, Karl Franz has nothing else to do but declare war. We could have had things go down the other way, had Cathay be the aggressor, but I often imagine Cathay as the Great Bastion in that tiny brain of mine. It's not really a nation that would be interested in attacking others. It's a huge country that has enough to do with defending itself that it can't really worry about invading somewhere so far away. The Empire, however, has a pretty big history of taking a look at other places and wanting them. They can't even keep their hands out of each other's provinces, and we all know what happened in Araby, even if that was mostly Bretonnia's fault. In any case, this isn't the Empire looking to completely dominate Cathay. With the Karl Franz in the big chair, he knows that taking a land that big is simply impossible. However, that doesn't mean that the Empire can't establish a foothold and prove that even with Cathay's size and force that it can't just push around any other country it likes. The first task in this war is to figure out a way through to Cathay. Any army that the Empire sends is going to have to deal with the ogres patrolling the Mountains of Morn, and you can be sure, with that much potential meat on the menu, the ogres are going to be preparing an ambush. Of course, the Empire has had its dealings with ogres before, and so they're not going in blind here. The thing about ogres is that they're mercenaries, and so while the Empire can't afford to just pay them off outright, they can promise them more meat and more plunder in the lands of Cathay. Some agree to this, some don't. Either way, as this is the Empire versus Cathay and not the Empire versus the Ogre Kingdoms and eventually the Chaos Dwarves, I'm not going to dwell too long on the Empire getting through the mountains. Plus, if you look at this from the Hobgoblin and Chaos Dwarf perspective, they might want to see Cathay get kicked around a bit in the hopes they could win some more land for their dastardly deeds. When they spill out into the west of Cathay, the Empire troops finally clash with their eastern counterpart. Both sides are stepping into the unknown here, but it's the Empire that will face the greatest shock. Cathay not only field some decent melee with their Jade Warriors and Celestial Guards, but they also have Crane Gunners which outrange handgunners, as well as plenty of ways to dominate the sky, from Long Marauders to the Sky Junk. There are also things like the Terracotta Sentinels and Jade Lions, which will show that these humans have monsters of their own that they can field. The Empire has no great beasties and single unit monsters, but its troops are regimented and drilled to face anything that Chaos and Orcs and every other evil that roams the world can offer. It might be an initial shock to see a Cathayan army spread out before the Empire, but it's not going to show them horrors beyond their imagination. Looking at the two armies as well, I don't think the early conflicts actually go in Cathay's favour. Don't get me wrong, Cathay is an incredibly strong faction. They're managing to fight off Skaven, Chaos, the Monkey King, Chaos Dwarves and Hobgoblins consistently, and on occasion they've even thought about expanding. They fight with armies said to be innumerable, and utilise harmony to fight efficiently on the battlefield. All that's good stuff, and as I've said, they've definitely got the air superiority, but they're not going to immediately send everything they've got to blast the Empire forces. Instead, Cathay is likely to underestimate the Empire as barbarians from the West, not understanding the magical capabilities and technology of Warhammer Fantasy's protagonist faction. Also, the Empire's cavalry is diverse and powerful. Demogryph Knights slamming into a Cathayan front line aren't going to pull any punches, and when we look at the all-around versatility for the Empire, they're a massively intimidating foe to face as well, and are likely to smash their way into Cathay, seriously surpassing the meager forces Cathay would probably send their way at the start of this conflict. The air superiority would quickly be countered by the Empire's gun lines, which might not have the range of the Crane Gunners, but they certainly have the numbers and rate of fire to limit the effectiveness of the Long Marauders. Things like the Sky Junk could plink at foes from up on high out of cannon range, but it alone would be easy pickings for something like a Lord on a Griffin or a Mage flying atop a Pegasus. And so, the Empire establishes a foothold in Cathay. Things so far are largely going as they did in the war against Araby. However, something that Araby doesn't have is dragons. As soon as the Cathayans hear of the Western forces kicking up their lovely harmony, at least a dragon is going to have to deal with it. Miao Ying, Zhao Ming, Guan Bo, take your pick. We'll probably need more than just one to truly kick the Empire out of Cathay, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's pick Zhao Ming as our dragon that first steps in, because Miao Ying gets enough love, and I think the Iron Dragon is going to be a great counter to the forces of the Empire, due to their reliance on their war machines, artillery and missile infantry. The heavily armoured forces of the Empire are going to meet the true powers of Cathay once a Divine Dragon enters the battlefield, and this really secures the air superiority for Cathay. The firepower from this army isn't going to be enough to wipe a dragon off the board, unless there's a lucky shot from a Luminesh or something like that. However, it is enough to keep the Empire from being wiped out of Cathay entirely. Instead of one big, concentrated and conquering force, at the arrival of Zhao Ming, the Empire decides to use its versatility and cavalry dominance to spread quickly across the Cathayan Empire, causing havoc and hoping to be too fast for the Cathayans to catch. While this keeps the Empire war effort alive, it's clear that there is going to be no major success in this invasion of Cathay. It's simply too big with armies too numerous. Even if the Empire didn't have to deal with Divine Dragons, it simply is too treacherous a path for Imperial armies to keep reinforcing those in Cathay. The Ogres and Chaos Dwarves are more than happy to take out anyone else who fancies chancing it through the Silk Road. Back home, as this war effort drags on, it becomes increasingly controversial in the Empire. Vlad von Carstein once said that a united Empire would be the strongest power in the world when he visited Cathay, but it's worth remembering that the Empire is very rarely, if ever, considered truly united. Elector counts have their own agendas, and while some would happily continue the war in the east, others, who are already dealing with orcs and beastmen that they can't ignore, want to bring their armies back home. In terms of manpower and coin, the Empire simply can't keep up an invasive effort like this for long. Even in Araby, a large part of the continued crusading wasn't officially funded by the Empire of Bretonnia, as knightly orders formed themselves and paid themselves in what loot they could find. In Cathay, where the fighting is going much more poorly, the loot isn't there, or at least the country's riches aren't ripe for plundering. As soon as Yuan Bo enters the fray alongside his brother, the Empire, even divided and trying its utmost to plunder the land, simply doesn't have the strength without reinforcements to carry on, and seeks to retreat. Yuan Bo, though, is enraged that these western barbarians were able to accomplish so much, and so Cathay decides it's time to see what lies out in the west. So long as their enemies are destroying each other, the Chaos Dwarves don't care much for stopping Cathay going through the mountains. The Ogres do harass the Empire as they retreat, further lowering their numbers and making things look quite bad for the Empire as Cathay heads west. Now we see the situation reversed. Again, I'm skipping over a lot of the mountain stuff because in reality, this situation would never happen because it would simply be too difficult to get such a massive army past the ogres and chaos dwarves without facing such significant losses that you would get to see these two factions at maximum power facing each other. Cathay does not underestimate the Empire, and yet still, as it enters its territory for the first time, it finds itself surprised. Yes, there are dragons, monsters and flying cavalry as well as plenty of innate magic and strong troops that the Cathayans can bring, but the Empire is a similarly widely militarized society. You don't hold off chaos, orcs, skaven and beastmen for centuries without being ready to throw down at a moment's notice. And so even if the Empire doesn't have dragons, it more than has the capability to defend itself. Against invaders, you can be sure as hell the Empire is going to call forth its allies. While the dwarves are going to want a peaceful solution, they'll lend a few sturdy warriors, and the Bretonnians won't want to be stomped on next if Cathay takes over the Empire. Kislev too doesn't want a new aggressive neighbour, while it also has to keep the Chaos invasions pushed back. While Cathay has the numbers to make ferrying supplies and men back and forth a little easier, it's still going to be hard to get the constant supply routes needed to sustain a war so far away, especially with 3 other powerful factions joining the Empire to kick these dragons out and into the mountains. While it may sound boring, unfortunately I think a war in-universe between these two ends in some sort of stalemate. Cathay would have to retreat as it can't afford to keep sending its men and resources into a battle it will just sink men into. Also, there would be a point where these two factions would really start to question why they're killing each other, considering they are the most powerful non-elf defenders of order around. And so, this conflict would end with both sides learning a lot more about one another, but with no clear winner. Both of these factions simply have too many external threats to deal with, alongside a massive distance between them in order to fully commit to a war that would have a decisive winner. If you put a gun to my head and told me that these two factions are right next to each other and are going to fight, and you asked me to pick a winner, well, first of all, I would ask that you remove the gun from my head, then I would and ah and eventually lean towards the Empire. Cathay's dragons are very terrifying, and yet so are steam tanks, luminarchs and Karl Franz when he has the power of Sigmar flowing through his veins. Cathay would decimate much of the Empire, but I think the Empire's versatility allows it to do a lot even if it doesn't necessarily have a lot. They can't field monsters or massive terracotta sentinels, but they can fight pretty much anything and everything if they bring the right army composition. If the Dragon Emperor and Empress of Cathay got involved, now that could be a different story, but my heart says Empire, even if it's just because as the protagonists, they could always pull out some plot armor to protect them from the dragon's teeth. But hey, that's just my theory. A Warhammer theory. Yep, not doing that again. That sounded awful. Let me know who you think would win between these two if my in-universe explanation was accurate, and what you want to hear me talk about next. Until then, peace, ghouls and gals.